The day Sterling Voss laughed was the day everything changed, though not in the way he expected. It was a Tuesday morning, the kind that starts gray and stays that way, when Joel Hartley walked through the glass doors of Voss Industrial Holdings with a manila envelope tucked under his arm and grease still faint under his fingernails despite 3 rounds of scrubbing. He had worn his best shirt, the dark blue one Maggie had picked out years ago, and he had arrived 11 minutes early because that was the kind of man he was. The kind who shows up on time, the kind who does the work, the kind who, for 38 years, had believed those things counted for something. They did not count for anything that morning. The lobby of Voss Industrial was the kind of space designed to remind you of your smallness. Marble floors the color of cream. A receptionist behind a desk that could have seated 8. A wall of glass looking out over the river, and on the opposite wall, a portrait of Sterling Voss, painted in oil, hanging at the exact height where it would be the first thing you saw when you stepped off the elevator. Joel noticed it immediately. He also noticed that the man in the portrait was smiling in a way that had nothing to do with warmth. He approached the desk and gave his name and said he had a 10 o'clock appointment with the contracts division. The young woman behind the desk, whose nameplate read Alicia, typed something and then looked at her screen for a moment too long before looking back at him. "I don't see you in the system," she said. Joel set the envelope on the counter and explained, calmly, that the appointment had been confirmed by email 3 days prior. He had the email. He could show her the email. He had printed the email because he had learned, over the years, that paper was harder to make disappear than a notification. Alicia took the printed email, studied it, and then picked up her phone. While she spoke in a low voice to someone on the other end, Joel stood with his hands loose at his sides and looked at the marble floor. 12 years. That was how long he had worked with Voss Industrial as an independent contractor, maintaining and recalibrating the hydraulic systems at 3 of their regional manufacturing facilities. He had never been late on a delivery. He had never submitted an invoice that didn't match the work. When a pressure fault at the Dayton plant had nearly caused a shutdown in 2019, it was Joel who had driven through the night, diagnosed the failure in 40 minutes, and had the line running again before the morning crew arrived. Sterling Voss's operations manager had called it extraordinary. He had said so in writing. Joel had that letter too, at home, in the same filing cabinet where he kept Maggie's medical records and the drawings his daughter Becca had made in kindergarten. Alicia put down the phone. "Someone will be down," she said. Joel nodded and waited. He was good at waiting. You learn patience when you spend your evening chapter books aloud to a 7-year-old who asks why the same word is spelled 2 different ways and won't let you move on until you've given her an answer that satisfies her. Becca had Maggie's stubbornness and Maggie's intelligence, and Maggie's way of tilting her heads slightly to the left when something didn't add up. Joel had spent 2 years after Maggie's death watching those gestures appear in their daughter like flowers coming up through cold ground, and he had felt simultaneously good and grateful every single time. The man who came down from the elevator was not from the contracts division. His name was Sterling Voss. Joel recognized him from the portrait, though in person Voss was slightly shorter and carried himself with the kind of deliberate ease that money buys after the 2nd or 3rd generation. He wore a suit that fit the way suits fit when they are made specifically for one body. He looked at Joel the way people look at a car that has been parked in their spot, not with hostility exactly, but with the assumption that the problem would resolve itself quickly. "Mr. Hartley," Voss said. "Not a question." "Yes, sir. You're here about the renewal contract." "The submitted renewal, yes. Filed 4 weeks ago under the service agreement terms. The response window closes this Friday." Voss looked at the envelope on the counter. He did not pick it up. "I'm aware of the timeline. Then you'll know why I came in person," Joel said. "I've sent 3 follow-up messages. No response. The contract covers 3 facilities. I have 9 employees who work those sites. I need to know if we're continuing." There was a pause. Around them, the lobby carried on. A courier moving through, two men in suits speaking quietly near the elevators, the faint sound of the city beyond the glass. Voss tilted his head in a way that was almost polite. "Your contract won't be renewed, Mr. Hartley." Joel had considered this possibility. He had not considered what came next. "We're bringing the maintenance function in-house," Voss continued. "It's a corporate efficiency decision, nothing personal." "That's your right," Joel said. "But the current contract runs through the end of the quarter. I'm also owed payment on the last two invoices, $78,000 outstanding, 60 days past due." Something shifted in Voss's expression. "Not much, just enough. Those invoices are under review," he said. "Under review for what?" There were questions raised about the scope of work billed. Joel was quiet for a moment. He had heard this language before in other contexts from other people. It was the language used when someone had already decided on an outcome and was working backward to justify it. "What questions?" he said. "Not a question either, anymore. The specifics are with our legal team." "The specifics," Joel repeated, "are in the service logs I submitted with every invoice. Time-stamped. Signed by your site managers." Voss smiled. It was the smile from the portrait. "I'm sure you believe that." That was when Joel understood that nothing useful was going to happen here. Not today. Not in this lobby, with its marble floors and its portrait, and this man standing in front of him, with the absolute certainty of someone who has never once been told that certainty has limits. He picked up the envelope from the counter. "I'd like to speak to someone in accounts payable," Joel said, "to confirm the invoices have been received and logged." "That's not something I can arrange right now." "Then, I'd like that in writing. That you're declining to confirm receipt." Something moved behind Voss's eyes. He turned and said something quiet to Alicia, and Alicia picked up her phone again. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave," Voss said. "You don't have a valid appointment, and this conversation is over." "My appointment was confirmed in writing. I have the documentation. Security will see you out." Two men appeared from somewhere to the left. Not aggressive, just present, in the way that size makes its point without needing words. Joel did not move immediately. He set the envelope on the counter again, opened it, and removed a single sheet of paper which he placed face up on the desk in front of Alicia. It was a formal written notice of the outstanding payment demand, with a reference number and a response deadline. He set his business card beside it. "That needs to be received and logged," he said to Alicia directly, not to Voss. "Please note the date and time." Alicia looked at Voss. Voss said nothing, which was, in its own way, an answer. Joel closed the envelope and turned toward the door. One of the security men moved to walk beside him, which was unnecessary but not worth arguing about. As they crossed the lobby, Joel heard Sterling Voss say something to someone nearby, something with a particular inflection that carried, and then he heard laughter. Not just Voss, two or three others, people passing through, people whose day this was not. He did not turn around. He pushed through the glass doors and walked out into the gray Tuesday morning and sat in his truck for 4 minutes with both hands on the steering wheel before he started the engine. He had a daughter to pick up at 3:15. He had work to do before then. He drove. What Sterling Voss did not know, and would not know for some time, was the particular shape of the thing he had just set in motion. He knew Joel Hartley as a contractor, a name on invoices, a set of hands that kept hydraulic systems running in 3 facilities that Voss rarely visited and never thought about unless something broke. He did not know that Joel had spent 12 years building meticulous records of every service call, every parts replacement, every site manager's signature, every email confirmation. He did not know this because it had never occurred to him that a contractor would do that. People like that, in his experience, were not organized in ways that mattered. What Voss knew, and what he believed to be sufficient, was that Hartley needed the contract more than Voss needed Hartley, that the $78,000 was leverage, that a man with a daughter and a mortgage and no corporate backing would eventually absorb the loss and move on, Because the alternative was expensive and slow, and men like that didn't have the stomach for it. He was right that it was expensive. He was wrong about the stomach. Joel called his attorney that afternoon. Her name was Dana Marsh, and she had handled the probate when Maggie died, and a contract dispute 2 years before that, and she spoke with the particular economy of someone who charges by the hour and respects her clients enough not to waste their time. He laid out the situation. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said she would need to review the documentation and could he come in Thursday. He came in Thursday with 2 binders. Dina Marsh was quiet for a long time while she read. Joel sat across from her desk and looked at the degrees on her wall and the photograph of her standing somewhere cold in a heavy coat, and he thought, not for the first time, about the difference between the way people present themselves and the way they actually are. Voss's lobby had been designed to say, power. Dina's office said, work. There were files on every surface. There was a coffee mug with a chip on the handle that she clearly hadn't replaced because it still worked. These service logs, she said finally, without looking up. The site managers signed off on all of these. Every one, including the disputed invoices, every single one. She turned a page, and the email confirmation of your appointment, you have the original, printed and time-stamped. She looked up at him. Did you document the interaction in the lobby? The refusal to confirm receipt? I wrote it up that evening. Date, time, names I could verify, sequence of events. Dina looked at him for a moment with an expression that was not quite a smile. Okay, she said. Tell me about the Dayton incident. Joel told her about the Dayton incident. He told her about the pressure fault, and the overnight drive, and the 40-minute diagnosis, and the written commendation from the operations manager. He told her he had the original letter. He told her he also had the internal maintenance report from before the fault developed. The one that showed the issue had been flagged in his service notes 6 weeks earlier, and the recommendation for preventive repair had been declined by Voss's in-house coordinator to save on costs. Dina put down her pen. You have that report, she said. I have my copy. I submitted it through the portal at the time. It would be in their system if they haven't deleted it. And the commendation letter? Yes. Who signed the commendation? Operations manager at the time, Raymond Sully. He left Voss Industrial about 8 months later. I have his contact information. Dina picked up her pen again and wrote something. Then she said, Joel, I need you to understand what we're looking at here. The unpaid invoices are straightforward. That's a breach of contract claim and we have strong documentation. But the Dayton material, the flagged fault, the declined recommendation, that's a different conversation. If Voss knew there was a risk and declined preventive maintenance to cut costs, and then, after the near failure, tried to bring the maintenance function in-house, partly to control the narrative going forward. Is that what you think happened? She looked at him steadily. I think I need to make some calls, she said. Do you know if any of your other service reports flagged similar issues at the other 2 facilities? Joel reached into the second binder. The thing about systems built on shortcuts is that they are not actually more efficient. They are cheaper in the short term, which is not the same thing. Sterling Voss had spent 22 years telling the difference between those 2 ideas. He believed he understood them. He had given speeches about operational efficiency at industry conferences. He had a framed quote in his office about the long view. What he had not done was read his own maintenance logs. Dina Marsh's first call was to the Ohio Department of Commerce, which handled workplace safety and equipment compliance for manufacturing operations. She did not make allegations. She asked questions about the regulatory framework for hydraulic system maintenance at industrial facilities. She asked about reporting requirements when safety recommendations were declined. She asked about the documentation trail that operators were required to maintain. Her second call was to a former colleague who now worked in commercial litigation and had, as it happened, handled 2 previous cases involving Voss Industrial's insurance carrier. Her third call was to Raymond Sully, who answered on the second ring and did not hang up. Joel did not know about most of these calls. He was at work, a new client, a small manufacturing operation in a town 40 minutes east of Columbus, replacing a failing valve assembly. He was careful and methodical, and he took photographs at each stage of the work because that was how he did things. His phone rang twice, and he let it go to voicemail because he was in the middle of a calibration sequence that required attention. When he finished, he sat in his truck and listened to the messages. The first was from Dina. Her voice had a quality he hadn't heard in it before. Not excitement exactly, but a kind of focused intensity, the way a person sounds when they have found the thread they were looking for. She asked him to call back when he could. The second was from a number he didn't recognize, with a Columbus area code. The man on the message said his name was Eric Broder, that he was a journalist with the Ohio Business Chronicle, and that he was working on a story about contract disputes in the regional manufacturing sector, and someone suggested Joel might have relevant experience. He left a number. Joel sat in his truck for a moment. He thought about Becca, who had her first soccer game that Saturday, and who had asked him twice in the last week whether he was going to be there, not in a worried way, but in the way of a child who already knew the answer and was just enjoying the confirmation. He thought about Maggie, which he did every day, usually in the quiet moments like this one. He thought about what she would say about all of this. She would say, "Call Dina back first." He called Dina back first. The meeting with the Ohio Department of Commerce investigator happened on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks later. Joel was not there. Dina attended on his behalf, but he had submitted his documentation. The flagged service reports, the declined maintenance recommendations, the time-stamped logs, the commendation letter, Raymond Sully's signed statement. Everything organized by facility and date, cross-referenced, with a table of contents. Raymond Sully, it turned out, had been waiting for something like this for a long time. Not out of grievance, he was not that kind of man, but because he had known, when he left Voss Industrial, that the way things were being managed at those facilities was going to matter eventually, and he had kept his own records, and he had been carrying them in a box in his garage for 18 months, not knowing quite what to do with them. He knew what to do with them now. The commerce investigation was quiet, as these things often are at the beginning. No press releases, no dramatic announcements. Files requested, files reviewed, interviews conducted in conference rooms that smelled like burnt coffee and carpet cleaner. Voss Industrial's legal team responded with the standard language of corporations that believe the standard language will be sufficient. It was not, this time, sufficient. The secondary finding, the one that Dina had not initially anticipated, but had begun to suspect around week 2, was that 2 of the 3 facilities had incomplete maintenance records in their own internal systems, records that should have existed based on the regulatory requirements, and that either had not been properly maintained or had been removed. This was, the investigator noted carefully in the language of someone who understood the weight of what they were writing, inconsistent with the documentation submitted by the contracted service provider. Joel's records were more complete than the company's own files. That was not a small thing. Eric Broder's article ran 6 weeks after his initial voicemail. It was careful and factual, and it named specific facilities and specific dates, and it quoted Raymond Sully by name, and it quoted a compliance attorney who was not involved in the case but who described, in general terms, the regulatory implications of incomplete safety documentation at hydraulic facilities. It did not quote Joel. It did not need to. The morning the article published, Dina called Joel at 7:42 a.m. "Have you seen it?" she said. "Just read it," he said. He was standing in the kitchen making Becca's lunch. Grape jelly and peanut butter on whole wheat, which was the only sandwich Becca had consented to eat for approximately 14 months. "The insurance carrier called my office yesterday," Dina said. "They want to open a separate conversation about the outstanding invoices." Joel cut the sandwich diagonally, the way Becca preferred. What does that mean? It means they're not interested in litigating the payment dispute in the current environment, Dina said. They want it resolved. How resolved? I'm going to need you to come in, she said. But Joel, bring the second binder. Becca's soccer game was on a gray Saturday morning, the kind of gray that threatened rain but didn't deliver it, the way Ohio autumn often operated. The field was slightly muddy. The other team wore yellow. Becca wore the blue of her team and had her hair in the two braids that Joel had been practicing for 2 years and could now execute in under 6 minutes, which was still not fast enough on school mornings, but was acceptable on weekends. She scored 1 goal and assisted on a second, and spent a significant portion of the second half involved in an apparent argument with a teammate about the correct positioning for a throw-in. Joel stood on the sideline with the other parents and watched her and felt, in the particular way that grief and love can coexist, both entirely alone and entirely fine. A man stood next to him for a while, the father of one of the other girls, a civil engineer named Patrick who had moved to the area recently. They talked, in the way parents talk at the sidelines of youth sports, about schools and traffic and the way the downtown had changed. Joel did not mention Voss Industrial. He did not mention Dina or the investigation or the article. That was not what this morning was for. After the game, Becca ran to him with her braids half unraveled and a grass stain on her knee, and he lifted her up, which she tolerated briefly because she was 7, and at the precise age where being lifted was both embarrassing and still secretly desired. "Did you see the goal?" she asked. "I saw both of them," he said. "I only scored 1. I know, I saw that too." She thought about this and seemed satisfied. Sterling Voss did not call Joel. That was not the kind of man he was. What he did, in the weeks after the article and the investigation and the insurance carrier's quiet pivot, was become very busy. He had legal meetings and strategic meetings and meetings with his communications team about how to characterize the situation publicly. He restructured 2 of the 3 facilities under a subsidiary. He issued a statement about his company's commitment to regulatory compliance, which was published on a newswire and largely ignored. The insurance settlement, because that was ultimately what it was, framed as something else, but functionally a settlement, covered the outstanding invoices plus additional damages that Dina had argued for, with the particular efficiency of someone who had stopped being surprised by her own effectiveness. Joel did not know the exact figure until Dina told him, and when she told him, he sat in the chair across from her desk and was quiet for a moment. "That's," he started. "Yes," she said. "That's enough to—" "Yes." He looked at the chipped coffee mug on her desk. "Is it over?" Dina leaned back in her chair. "The commerce investigation is ongoing. That's separate from your case and out of your hands now. Voss's problems with the compliance side of this are going to continue. But your piece of it," she paused. "Your piece is done." Joel nodded. He thought about the drive home. He thought about what Becca was doing right now. She was at school. It was Thursday. Thursday was the day they had science, which she liked because the teacher let them handle things. Rocks and seeds, and once, a small plastic model of the human ear that had captivated her for an entire dinner conversation. "I want to write Raymond Sully a letter," Joel said. Dina raised an eyebrow. Why? Because he didn't have to do what he did. He had nothing to gain from it. Dina considered this. He had the satisfaction of doing the right thing. "That's not nothing," Joel said. "But it's not enough, and I want him to know I'm aware of the difference." She looked at him for a moment. "You're an unusual client," she said. "I'm a mechanic," he said. "We don't leave things the way we found them." The letter to Raymond Sully was 4 paragraphs long and said, essentially, "Thank you, and I know what it costs to do the right thing, and I wanted you to know that it mattered." Joel mailed it on a Friday afternoon, the old way, in an envelope with a stamp. It felt like the right method for that particular message. Raymond Sully called him 2 weeks later. They talked for 40 minutes. Sully said he'd been thinking of starting a consulting practice around industrial safety compliance. He had the background for it, and there seemed to be a market, and he hadn't quite known how to start. Joel said he might know a few people who needed exactly that kind of help. They exchanged numbers and said they'd be in touch, and they both meant it. What remained after everything was not triumph exactly. That was not how these things felt. What remained was closer to the specific quiet that comes after a long effort, the kind of tired that is not unhappy, the kind of stillness that is not empty. Joel drove Becca to school on Monday morning. She had a project due about a historical figure she had chosen, and she had chosen, for reasons that had taken 3 evenings to explain, a woman named Alice Hamilton, who had spent her life investigating workplace hazards and fighting to make industrial environments safer. Joel had not suggested Alice Hamilton. He had not known who Alice Hamilton was until Becca explained it to him over soup and bread on a Thursday night, with the particular intensity of a 7-year-old who has decided a thing is important. He had looked her up later, alone, after Becca was asleep. He had read about her for a long time. At the drop-off circle, Becca climbed out of the truck and turned back to look at him through the open door. She had both braids intact, which was a good morning. She had her backpack and her project folder and her expression of someone who has a lot to do today and is not displeased about it. "Are you going to be here at 3?" she asked. 3:15, he said. She considered this. "Okay," she said, and she meant it, and he knew she meant it, and she went. He sat in the drop-off line for a moment after she'd gone, watching the door of the school close behind her. The gray morning had given way, just slightly, to something lighter at the edges. It would probably cloud back over by noon. But for now there was light on the sidewalk, and the sound of the engine ticking under the hood, patient and steady, the way good machines are when they have been properly cared for. He had 9 employees to call this morning. He had a new client who needed an assessment on a ventilation system. He had a daughter at 3:15. He pulled out of the drop-off circle and drove.